And
Okay.
it's 11:01, and I think I see people kind of coming into the digital room, so to speak. And I welcome everybody. I'm Holden Luntz, for those that don't know me. I have the pleasure of being here with the distinguished photographer, Michael Eastman, this morning. Michael is one of the photographers in this show, the exhibition that we just opened called Rooms That Resonate with Possibilities. And among other bodies of work that Michael has shot are these extraordinary rooms in places in America and in Europe and in Cuba. So I welcome Michael here. For those that don't know Michael, and everybody should know Michael, Michael is not new to this. He has had a distinguished 50-year career. He's got work in the Metropolitan Museum, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the Chicago Art Institute, the LA County Museum, European collections, important corporate collections. So his pictures speak largely and are amazing images, especially if you get the chance to see them up close, because oftentimes the images can be 6 by 8 feet, and there aren't so many commanding pictures of interiors that hold up and are this sort of monumental and beautiful. So what I want to do, Michael, is go through sort of a thumbnail history, talk about various bodies of work. And what's nice is during the last year in COVID, an awful lot of people have had to do very little because they said COVID has prevented them from working. Well, Michael is a workaholic, and the last year has been immensely productive. So I want to share what you've been up to since COVID. So let's make a start at it.
Okie doke. Do you want to show the first beginning slides, or should I?
We're going to go to a slide stack, and we're not going to talk about every slide.
No, I know. I think we started with the black and white, I think.
Yep. So Jay is just pulling up the images, the files. So the earliest pictures are, this is basically a structural picture where you learn black and white.
Is it on the screen? Because it's not on mine. You all. Boy, I don't want to. That's all right. I'll just fake it because
Hold on one sec. Let's make sure everyone sees it. Michael, when you see it, everyone.
There it is. I see it. So basically, when I first began, I was trying to teach myself how to see and how to photograph and how to compose, more importantly. So these early frames are just abstract architectural and a junkyard I used to go to. And I would photograph these things and spend hours arranging, just an inch here, a quarter inch there, up, down, to get basically a formal composition of almost a painting. And I did this all the way through in the late 70s and early 80s. This was more complicated, kind of a little further along. And at some point in this process, move to the next one. Yeah, I shot this photograph. I switched to 4x5, which gave me the advantage of multiple holders. So I could shoot black and white and color when I was out there instead of one or the other. And when I made this in black and white, I liked it a lot. And the next slide was in color. And from that point on, I never could look at a black and white photograph again without thinking, gee, I wonder what the colors look like. It was great.
Can you share a quick story with us, Michael, which I find very sort of amusing, and it's the way the art world was maybe 40 or 50 years ago. You're basically self-taught, but you taught by looking at the work of great photographers that were influential to you.
Yes.
And had something to teach you.
Yes.
So what happened when you got stuck trying to figure out black and white value system?
Oh, I was working in black and white. I tried the zone system. I got Ansel Adams' book. I did densitometer readings. I did all this processing, and basically, I was having real difficulty with it. And so I figured, who am I going to talk to? So I called Carmel, California. I asked for the number of an A. Adams, And the guy picked up the phone, was Ansel Adams, and I said, "Mr. Adams, I'm having a problem with the agitation." And he was so helpful and so warm and so wonderful. And he gave me some suggestions, which actually didn't work, but I finally figured it out. But that was 1973, and you can't imagine me calling somebody up of that stature and asking that question and not getting hung up on.
No, it's pretty amazing.
No, it was the time.
We're going to go next. So when you saw the information that was available and the emotive power that you said,
Yeah,
the color pictures had that black and white pictures didn't, you were hooked.
I was.
Really, masters of photography back in the set, with rare exception, were really black and white photographers. So it made you unusual that you really embraced color photography very early on, and was sort of one of the pioneers in contemporary color photography.
Well, thanks. It was. I mean, this one was probably one of the. It was fit in this sort of abstract thing, but didn't. But I made it, and it was probably the most. One of the most first big winners. All these people kept asking me where this was photographed from, and it was the beginning of Vanishing America and the beginning of looking for sort of a narrative, a story. But everybody who looked at this photograph would say, "Is this in Connecticut? Is this in Michigan? Is this in Colorado? Is this in California?" Because that's where I spent my summers as a kid. So I realized there was a collective consciousness in the world, and I read about it a lot. And in art, there was these people all sort of owned this and felt like it was their own experience. And as my work got less and less abstract and more narrative, this was a lesson that was really important. So it was this kind of image, and then the next one was another one, an interior that was really near my home. And again, it tells a story of a different time when I grew up. A 10-cent Coke on the right side, and this just a gumball machine. One of my favorites. Both those two images didn't fit. And sometimes when you're working on bodies of work, there are things that don't fit that you can't give up. And those are the ones that usually lead you for me anyway, lead me to the next. Then I went to Europe for the first time because I was sort of running out of things in St. Louis and around my area, and I had an opportunity to shoot abstraction, not unlike what I was doing in those early black and whites, but now in color.
That you beginning were sort of agoraphobic, that you grew up in St. Louis, you embraced St. Louis, you returned to it in the last year and did some astounding work in St. Louis again. But what was it like when Europe opened up to you, and how did you get access to the places that you shot, which are amazing?
Well, it was, it was early, and I didn't know much, and I didn't know many people that did what I was doing, and there weren't many people that were doing. So I didn't know what a location scout, or didn't have an internet to really search out interiors. So it was me putting a backpack on my back, and with 50 pounds of tripod and film holders and camera stuff, and just walking around these cities. This was Budapest. And these were courtyards that the doors fortunately were open, and I kept opening these doors, and every once in a while I got a Christmas present. Most of the time.
And something that I should let viewers know, that sometimes there is an aesthetic. It's very popular now because everybody does it. It's called snap and shoot. That you point a camera, it's an easy camera to use. It's a very small, now digital, it's a very small format, but you embraced complicated equipment, large negatives, slow, long exposures, and made, rather than cropping, looking at a picture and cropping out the part that worked from early on, you concentrated on your craft. You used the best equipment. You used large format negatives, and you were very, very careful about how you composed a picture.
Right. Well, I always wanted to go big. I think I've always, some part of me wanted to be a painter, but I was so ADD, the idea of waiting for paint to dry was, I couldn't imagine that. So that was the beauty of photography. It was so quick and democratic, and you could take a picture the first day. It was maybe terrible. But my thought was, I was always thought of myself as these things as paintings. And I always thought of them to be large, which nobody was doing in the early 80s. And I started printing these things big. And they had a certain presence. And I also I love the detail of, I was using an 8x10 camera at the time, which was, just a revelation. First of all, you're looking through an 8x10 glass window on the back of your camera. And so you're seeing a photograph there, basically. It's not like a little viewfinder you're looking through. So it was, I was thinking big, and I was thinking as sharp as I could make it. And so that when it went big, it would look really, would hold up.
So when we put the PowerPoint stack together, this is an important picture for you, even though it's black and white. Can you talk a little about it, and then we'll proceed on?
Well, it's funny because it's actually called Black and White in Color. It's a color print.
Oh.
The wall was black and the paint was white. There was no color in it. But the thing that was about this was, it was 1986, I think. And it was the end of my abstraction for a while, for 25 years, because I didn't think I was ever going to find an abstraction that was this good and this complicated. Everybody thought I cut it out and I did some kind of collage, but this is a straight 8x10 negative of an old gas station that somebody painted to make look pretty cool, I thought, and in the middle of downtown St. Louis. So it stopped abstraction, and I started moving to other things.
So we're going to go on to the first body of work that you said, really, I mean, in the beginning, you shot a lot of commercial work because that's how you made a living, but this begins the fine art body of work that has, a big audience, and your horse's book had a distribution of 50,000. So this is the first book of Michael. I think you can get it. It's not in print now, but you can easily find it.
Yeah.
Michael Eastman horses. So tell me how the horse's body of work came into being.
Well, my wife Gail and I were in Taos, New Mexico on a commission with a person who wanted me to photograph the landscape around his house. And we went out there for 2 weeks, stayed in his house. And I had a blue sky every day. That's the one thing I didn't know much about landscape, but I soon discovered that a blue sky is pretty deadly shooting color landscapes, shooting black and white landscapes for that matter. So for 2 weeks, we hunted around, didn't find anything. And at one point at dawn on the last day we were there, not dawn, dusk, the sun was going down, a few clouds appeared, and we're driving along the Pueblo in Taos, and this horse is being hit by light from the low angle, and it was just stunning. And I said, God, that's beautiful. Gail said, get out and shoot it. So I got out and I started shooting. As soon as I got out, the horse was like a supermodel. He was turning to the left and turning to the right. The light was flowing through it, and I just kept shooting. And when I got back to St. Louis and looked at my film, the only thing that I really wanted to print was the horses. And that began about a 3 or 4 really intense year of just photographing the horses. They're shot in color, converted in Photoshop to black and white. It started to get and colored in Photoshop as well. Later on, I started hand painting them, but these were done in the computer and printed on watercolor paper. And they were iris prints. They were quite beautiful. And the thing was that I started to sell for the first time. So here I am 20 years into it, and I'm starting to make a little money on fine art and still making a living shooting commercial studio things.
So I would like to go now to a body of work that you're very well known for, which was another book that came out, which was the book, The Work in Cuba. And there were 4 trips to Cuba. This is the Cuba book, and from 1999, 2000, 2010, and 2014. We'll go to the first Cuba picture, and the first one's very abstract, but what was the motivation behind going to Cuba?
Well, my wife had been looking at magazines, especially French fashion magazines, and was showing me these photo shoots that were done in interiors in Cuba. And they were so stunning places. I felt like I was looking at something that had been frozen completely in time and hadn't changed in 50 years, and most of them hadn't. And so I just thought, I better get there before it gets, all the good ones get taken. And Gail and I went there, and it was quite an experience. I didn't know how to approach it really. So I started by shooting what was comfortable, which were color abstractions of Cuba facades. And that first year was just, again, searching, driving, walking, and looking and trying to sort of get a sense of the place, which took, as we were there about 2 or 3 weeks, and it took a bit of time to do that. When I look back at that shoot, wasn't that successful, except for this next picture. I think it's the next one. Yeah, when I was, we were driving along Fifth Avenue where the embassies were, and there was a beautiful, beautiful building with a green vitrolite roof with a huge black hole in the thing, and you could just see it was going into it. So I went up to it, knocked on the door, and said, and Isabella, that's who owned it, came to the door, answered it. I said, I love your house. Is there any way I could photograph the interior? She said, yeah. And I went back the next day and made this photograph. She was very ill. It was really falling apart. There was water coming in from the 3rd floor all the way down to the 2nd and down to the 1st. And I made this photograph. And she was just a dear, and I just loved the photograph. Got back, and it was a photograph that was like that first horse. Yeah. It was one that everybody sort of wanted, and it told a story really strongly. Probably the most narrative piece I had done, maybe besides the Marcellas, the Pink Building, and it was a significant change in my life. It was a seminal moment.
And we'll go to the next picture.
Year later, went back to see Isabella. Isabella was gone. She had died 3 months after I had been there. She had a heart condition. And her niece took over, and there was an energy in the room that wasn't there before. She put her laundry up. The dust on the ground was swept up. There was construction on that far right, that little table with some kind of construction nails or something. And also she had put up, if you go back one real quick and look at the chandelier close, you see there's just a few. And if you go forward again, they're back in there. But when you look at the 6 by 8 foot print, and the reason I shot that big was you can go up to that picture and look at those crystals, and you can see little red and blue ties from the grocery store to put those things on. So this energy that she brought to this house was kind of I was so sad that Isabella's wasn't there to greet us, but I just love what her niece had done and the energy of the space.
I'd like to bring up a concept to share with the people that are listening to us now. If we can go back for a slide, there is a term used in language and in communication called metonymy. And metonymy means you can suggest something being there through something else being there.
Yeah.
When I look at your spaces, they're very human spaces. The chairs look like somebody is just going to enter in, or somebody just got out of the chairs. And I think the human presence in all of your pictures that are about human spaces, they're very human in what the viewer looks at and associates to them. They're not architectural studies. They're very human studies. And I think by the people not being there, the possibilities are much greater when you look at them to imagine the life that was lived there. But the pictures have this amazing human element to them, where if 2 people were sitting in those chairs, it would be quite specific, and it would be about the house with the 2 people that are living there or visiting there. It's a very different picture to look at when you suggest to people without them actually being there. It's very powerful, and you do it a lot with chairs, with beds, with tables. And to me, it opens up the pictures to much greater potential for possibilities.
You know, yeah, I didn't know that term, but it's certainly from going forward from this point, it's especially with the interiors, but now almost everything. I'm looking for that. In the beginning, it was all about composition, narrative snuck in. Now it's all about narrative, and composition is underneath the picture, but it's not the picture.
Absolutely. And I'd like to share just with our Zoom callers too, that one of your hard, fast rules that you've developed is you never stage a site. You never move things around to make a better picture.
No, because I get in the way of the narrative. There's a reality about it, and a consistency in everything. Once in Seville, I made a photograph. Gail and I were walking and found this interior, Renaissance interior, stunning, beautiful. And on the one that's 500-year-old table, leaning against it was a pair of golf clubs. And I moved it. And to this day, I regret moving it. It was perfect. And I was just not ready to see it and not ready to see the importance of it. Another thing is I get people, that come to these shows, and when I talk to people, they say, "Who's your set designer? I mean, who creates this mood? Who creates it?" And I said, it's life. It's recognizing that everything in a room has a symbol and a meaning and a history. And by getting out of the way and presenting it, you let the viewer see what you saw and feel what you felt. It's that collective consciousness. When I see something and say that, somebody comes up to me and says, "I love this photograph because of that orange." And I said, "Well, that's why I photographed it, that orange against that green." And that's the other thing about these. They're very much about color and color. I feel like I became more and more of a colorist the longer I do this. It's important.
I wanted to bring that up and to say that if there are definitions, if there are characteristics that make for a great sort of Michael Eastman photograph, it's that sense of a saturated color, it's the lyricism of places, and it's the idea that these are indescribable colors. It's time and use and human interaction have all made the palette what it is. And the pictures are a sort of a testament to the beauty and the strength and the history of survival. So
Yeah, I
amazing
agree.
that way.
It's interesting because on a technical note, these are long exposures. You mentioned it. Sometimes in the darkest spaces, they're 3 or 4 minutes, and sometimes longer. And so what happens is this film is not really designed for long exposure, so you can get some real crazy colors going. Everybody always asks me, "Are you juicing the colors up?" And I go, "No. In fact, I have to do the opposite. Because the film doesn't respond well, I have to desaturate the colors." But color, as I said a minute ago, is so important. So the difference between that blue and that green, I mean, with this film that shifts and with different light sources, it's almost impossible to do exactly what you see. So you're balancing greens against blues, and you're adding a little yellow in the green maybe because the film didn't pick it up. And so I try to remember, when I'm printing, I try to be honest but remember romantically.
Yeah, they're amazing, and there is sort of a common thread and a link to all of the pictures, that it looks like the same aesthetic is behind the compositions and the interest of the pictures. Can you talk a little bit about this picture?
Yeah, this was in that same room with the one before, I think, with the red chair, and this too. That one was it. There's a Jewish star there, which I thought was interesting. It's called crypto architecture, and it was a Jewish family that built it, but they didn't. The Jews were not allowed to practice in Cuba at this time, so they snuck the Jewish star as a kind of design element. It wasn't a temple, but it was a Jewish home that built it. But I get that. But these pictures of Fidel in the background, and then this young daughter, and this almost like a high school graduation picture. It's these things became kind of like little temples or altars. I always feel about what's in them or telling you a real story about this family. And again, the chairs, I never move those chairs, but I move my camera so those chairs line up where I want them to line up.
Okay.
I move everything by moving the camera. And this is a music room in Havana, just stunning color. And again, that doorway leaning against it, and that piano that's broke down, but still they're giving lessons and people are still learning music.
I think one of the things, Michael, that distinguishes you from, say, Candida Hoffer, who also shoots large format interiors, or Struth or Gursky, is they tend to shoot large places that are impersonal, whether they be theaters, whether they be museums, whether they be factories. The thing about Michael Eastman is Michael Eastman respects and takes almost as a personal historian. You're drawn to very personal spaces, spaces that have to have so many stories to share that we'll never know.
Yeah, I think that I wanted more intimate portraits. I don't think I agree with you that those photographs those photographers that you mentioned, extraordinary work, but I wanted to be much more intimate.
And the work shows. And if you get up close to a picture, they're fascinating because there's a depth to them and there's a kind of a mystery to them. And they may look, in a sense, they look exotic, but in another sense, they're the pictures that other people would have overlooked. They're the places on the verge of being forgotten. And photography itself is an act of remembrance. And I think that's why the pictures are so strong, that they remember these spaces and they remember them in the most beautiful way possible.
Yeah, I was talking to a young photographer a couple of days ago. We were talking about that. And I said to him, we photographers are regardless of what our intent in that photograph, to make art, whatever, we're historians above all. Eventually, if we're lucky enough, 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now, somebody will want to look at that photograph, maybe not because of the purpose, because it was a piece of art, but because of what it told us about our history. So I think we're photographers are a lot of things, but I think we're also historians.
I totally agree. Historians in the nicest way, in the most artful way.
Yeah.
Let's go on to Europe, and you can talk about some of the pictures that were made in Europe. This picture, I want people to be aware that there's also sort of a signature device that's in a number of your pictures, and it has to do with doors and mirrors. They are very interesting, the way you shoot them and the kind of impact they have in your pictures.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, go on.
No, I just want you to say something about that.
Yeah. So, this one, first of all, let me explain why I'm not in the picture. When I get in these situations, I do one of two things. This is a long exposure, 3 minutes. So I could shoot it and walk out and come back in 3 minutes and you wouldn't see me. In this case, I was actually on the ground, in front of my camera, out of the frame. But I love these mirrors because these especially is my favorite. It breaks up the reality in a way. You see another room basically because of them. There's a mystery about them, and the doorways and the candles and the color of the couch and how it's worn and the sheen. Those are all, again, hints about what went on in there, what the place was, and also artistically or aesthetically, I should say, they break things up into some sort of bizarre kind of ways that I can look at. I still discover things about this image because of that, because there's so much intricacies in the way these things are refracted and broken up, etc.
And I think it's nice is that they're very realistic pictures. You know exactly what you're looking at, but the mirrors and the doors often introduce wonderful abstract concepts and abstract images into a figurative image.
Yeah, it's best when everything's in it. You know what I mean? It's best when it's
Absolutely.
narrative, it's color, it's composition, it's abstraction, it's, it's mystery, it's history. When you start out as any artist, you learn to juggle one ball at a time. And that's what I did with the early architectural things. And then you try to get a second one and a third one. And if you're a good juggler, you get 5 up there. And I see that as a metaphor for an artist. You start simple, you master it, you add, you keep trying to get better, more complicated.
It reminds me of something. I was watching an Avedon interview with Charlie Rose, and Charlie Rose asked Avedon what was the mark of a photographer that he admired, and he admired Irving Penn and he admired Cartier-Bresson. And he said what he admired and what made a photographer great was the sheer appetite for work, the
Yeah.
sheer appetite to keep going back to a project, to keep shooting, to know that you've done it right, and then to keep doing it. And
Right.
this is a mark of Michael Eastman. You're
Yeah.
incredibly productive and you never stop.
No,
So
thanks.
this is, if we can go back, this is the first time we've had this picture. It's sitting in our front window. It's a little unusual in that a sense that it isn't, it's a space that looks pretty well restored, but it's
Yeah,
an
I'm sorry, go on.
no, can you tell us where it's shot? And
It's in Paris. It's the Italian embassy. It's an old, just a beautiful, beautiful mansion. And this is when I finally got to figure out about location scouts that could get me into places, because you can't, after 9/11, you can't get in anywhere. And so this was just a stunning place, and it's not a normal photograph for me. It's a diagonal, it's an angle, it's a corner, it's a sphere. But to say, I want to go back just one sec. What I think is important in photography too is that the only way you learn is by doing, and the only thing you learn from doing is by the mistakes you make. The things that you do right don't teach you anything. The things that you do wrong give you some information that you can work on to continue to get better. And I think that's why I keep shooting, because I mean, at some point in all these series we've been looking through, I think there was a point where I kind of did what I could do and I was ready to move on. And like I said before, it was usually something in that group that didn't fit. Those mirror ones, we come back to that luminosity later. That's the same thing. One back. Oh,
and so these
Yeah.
are, if we can, Jay, if we can advance a couple forward. Again, this is a sort of a grand space for you. And it shows a sort of a whole kind of different photograph and a sort of looking at a space that's, again, is this the embassy as well?
No, this is in Syracuse, I think, Sicily. And it's, again, an old mansion. I got a really good friend there now who is on the lookout for things that have never been photographed. So I was lucky to get in about a dozen of these. Yeah, these are, me trying new things and learning from a lot of the old lessons, but again, a kind of narrative in this grand room, different take, but.
And this, I think, is very sort of minimal and maximal at the same time. It's got a very, very interesting balance and a palette that's very, very rich. And I think the framing is, to take if I walked into this room, I would be scratching my head. How do you take a picture of a room like this? You seem to have found from so many years of doing it, just where you need to be and what kind of lens you need and how it can look graceful and beautiful and get the whole picture in.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up. This is, first of all, this is everything. I use one lens. I always have. It's a wide angle lens. It's an architectural camera with an architectural lens. So everything's squared up. But this is a really, really dark room. And the only light was the little window on the left that you could open. and it just squeaked a little bit of light in there. It was about a 4-minute exposure. So it's hard to see, and it's hard to see what you're going to get. You have the little faith that it's going to happen. But when I get back to the studio, this was a 4x5 sheet of film, and I scanned it in a high-res scanner, best investment of my life in business. And I got the digital file and started working in Photoshop, which I've always been working in the darkroom from 1972 to yesterday. It's something that's important to me in the process. And I learned to become a good printer over 50 years, but the digital darkroom of Photoshop, is so remarkable in terms of the control of lightening that right side just enough so it kind of matches the left side. And everything, it is normal and it is natural light, but you got to work really hard to render that on a piece of photographic paper.
No, it's an amazingly rich and seductive picture. Can we?
And the wide angle, that chandelier is like a second picture in this room, and that's part of the closer to the wide angle that kind of gets bigger and sort of more dense.
Okay, so this is of the European pictures. This is the last one. This is Venice, and I think this is an example of what a digital darkroom can do that a normal darkroom can't. Correct?
Yeah. No. When Ansel was shooting in black and white, he had about I think a 7 zone, meaning from dark black with detail to white with detail, not blown out, but that was his range. With a color negative and a digital, you've got probably 10, maybe 11, meaning that you can get in this picture, you can look at the shadow, especially in the top left. There's detail in that shadow. And then the highlights, that's a sunny, pretty bright day through some white sheer curtains. And so to be able to control that range by burning and dodging the way I did in the darkroom with my hands and the little paddle to lighten and darken certain areas, I'm doing it with such precision that I could literally come and take that curtain in the back and just burn that down a little bit to get a little bit of detail in it, or dodge, meaning allowing less light so it stays lighter, doesn't get so dark in these shadow areas. And that's what I did in the darkroom. But you'd get one good print out of 10, and you'd never really get what you wanted. It was always, you could see a little of the dodge, you could feel that this was a little dark over there. It just was a really imperfect sort of a process, and the digital world made me a better analog printer.
It's a beautiful image. And if we go on now, let's go to America. There is a book called Vanishing America, which is the third book of Michael's. And I think this one, you can get this one, I think is still in print, if I'm correct. So
it's still available. They're all sort of available. The Cuba, they're all available, but it's like eBay. It's not
hard. So let's go to America, and we've got a lot of the pictures, and I think I'm going to sort of speed up things so that we can get to, through more of the PowerPoint. But as we go through these, if there's like this one, if you want to talk about a couple of them that are really meaningful to you.
This one was in 2005 in New Orleans in the 9th ward of 3 months or 2 or 3 months before Katrina. Haunting photograph at the time. I didn't know why until the Katrina came, and I realized that it was kind of a predictor of a stormy future. And it was driving along at dusk, which is that golden hour where that light is hitting those things.
And now it's a memory, obviously.
Yeah, and I photograph a lot in New Orleans. It's a beautiful and haunted place. This is part of the Vanishing America trip where we went on. Gail and I drove all over the country, 36 states, I think, over a couple, 3 years. And this was out in California.
We'll go through some of them rather quickly.
Yeah, sure.
The next body of work.
But again, these, when I look at these and think back on what they look like in reality, they're pretty darn close. But I just love color. And these Vanishing America have that sort of 50s mid-century kind of color palette.
I'd like to just sort of highlight and bring up really quickly to people that there are various languages that happen sort of simultaneously when you look at a picture. I think from Walker Evans, signage and lettering is one kind of language, is one form of communication. Composition is another, color is another. And what happens, which to me makes these pictures amazingly rich, is that you're layering different language systems simultaneously and using them to the effect that every picture has maximum potential power to move you to communicate and to be expressive. So if you go through, you'll look and you'll see a lot of the signage. We'll keep going through some of them.
Oh, we skipped one.
Yes, and now it's to the pandemic.
Okay, we're going to end the talk with more of the Vanishing Americans. So we're going to see more of those pictures as we take questions. But Michael, tell us what you've been up to the last year.
It's been the most productive time I've ever experienced. I think part of it was just having no distractions. These cyanotypes were the first sort of thing that I got involved in. I've always wanted to do them. And I just always, just never really had the time to set up the darkroom and studio to do it. Photographed right near my home in this beautiful park, Forest Park, St. Louis, and made these photographs in the morning and making negatives in the afternoon and printing the next day. It was like in 1972 when I first started. It was that immediacy, and I had complete control. I wasn't dependent on anybody or anything except for FedEx to send me new film and paper, etc. But everything I could do in my own studio and had control over. And that was sort of a wonderful thing to be doing during the pandemic. And it was, I also found these to be sort of haunting kind of photographs, these sort of negative trees, white against a dark sky. They're kind of an impending sort of, a little frightening, which I was kind of feeling anyway.
And I think the hand of the artist is, there are variations as you work out all of the series. Once you find something that you want to dive into, you explore it quite thoroughly.
That's the best. That's the best part, Holden. The worst part is when you don't know what you want to do next, and the best part is when you do.
If people have not made or are not familiar with cyanotyping, cyanotyping is basically the hand of the artist. It is as early as basic silver printing. You print with iron salts, which turn blue when the light tags them instead of gray as a silver print does. But Michael, you hand coat uses, it's from beginning to end, getting beautiful, beautiful paper that's large format paper, and then hand coating the paper. They're contact printed, so you don't put them in the enlarger, but it's all handwork. It's not mechanical, it's not digital. It's really goes back to very sort of arts and crafts where no two pictures will ever look alike. So I think it's a return to sort of the basic joy of picture making, and they're beautiful pictures, and we have them in the gallery. They're amazing.
Thank you. I think it's interesting is one of the things I found most intimidating about these were the brush strokes on the edges, because when I was starting to do it, I was so self-conscious about what they look like that you could see that in the final image. And then as I got more and more into it, it became, I trusted that whatever I was doing, if as long as I didn't think about what I was doing, that I would be coming up with lines and textures that were better than if I was really trying to do it. And I just love sometimes looking at the edges as much as I did the picture themselves. And when you look at them close, these are 44 by 30, so they're a big cyanotype. Images. But they look like, to me, the top edge of that looks like a landscape with trees. And I just got lost in the process of working with the emulsion and painting on that, as you said, that beautiful paper.
And again, it's the sort of seduction of color, but it's one color.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of those marks are from other photographs, or sometimes I will put 2 or 3 transparent negatives on top of each other, not sure exactly how things are going to go. So I'm in cyanotypes. I'm doing what I thought I wanted to do in the beginning, which was be a painter, and I'm also still a photographer. I love that.
Okay, and for something completely different, for people who
Yes.
thought they knew you, how about
Yeah.
this body of work?
Well, this work is urban luminosity, and it's a thing I've been working for years on, which is photographing through old glass, both during the shoot and sometimes after the shoot, sometimes both. But I just love the way these things get broken up, and then the bigger they get, because I want to go really big with these, then all this gorgeous way light is broken up in this camera and through this optical process that I have. Gave me a fresh start on architecture that I had looked at or photographed before.
And so a lot of them sort of blur the line between figuration and abstraction. Most of what I look at, what I'm drawn to very early on, is I know exactly what I'm seeing. You're preserving something that has a heart and a soul to it. This sort of stretches. And this is really about the formal aspects of design and color. So it's a whole, I think it's a continuation, but it's a very different side of you.
Yeah, it's still got the color, and I still like the mystery of the spaces, um, and I've always loved abstraction. I just, I think it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. People see it on the streets if they're looking, and that's on some level. That's what these have. I like the idea that as a photographer or an artist, I've had a few times when people have come up to me and said, I was walking down the street the other day and I saw a window or a wall, and the way the light was hitting or the abstraction of it, I thought of you. And I thought that there's no better compliment that an artist can get in that they change
That's
the way
a
people.
Michael Eastman picture. So, and so a lot of them are shot and then reshot and reshot, right? So these
Yes.
are not single process pictures.
Yes, and sometimes there are more than one image that I'm reshooting. Sometimes I'm layering things. Sometimes it's just like I'm free of not free of photography, but photography is the starting point, not the ending.
Well, I think that sort of brings us full circle. As we look at some of the St. Louis pictures, I think we have 10 minutes to open it up to questions.
Yeah, real quickly about this, I just want to say I photographed in St. Louis in these areas that white flight decimated, and there's some houses still left. And what I loved about these is a lot of them were frontal like this, but I started to shoot more and more horizontal, more landscape. And what I've been doing for 50 years is taking a little step back each period of time to try to include more in. And I think was a big jump for me in terms of the way I was making photographs. And it's exciting to me going forward.
Yeah, and they're really, I mean, there's something about them that is really very, very beautiful. And there's something about them that, reflects the last year when people feel like they're isolated and they don't have this human contact and they want to return and they want to be renewed. And there's something lovingly about the way you look at the spaces and the human dimension is still there. You're just waiting for someone to walk out the door and to physically give life to these spaces.
Maybe not these so much, but yeah.
Not these, but the
These
whole,
last, no, but these last couple. But yeah, there's things like that are fun. Old Obama sticker on that one.
yeah, signage is really interesting, the way it's incorporated into the work, but it's there, so it's part of the pictures. And Jay, do you have some
Yep.
questions?
So I'm going to read these off my phone that we were emailed, and then I have to just get out of the slide to open the rest.
And this is
But
the last slide, which I think is
it's a good one.
From Carlos Zamora, Michael, would you agree that your rooms are intimate portraits of people without people? Do you have any thoughts about privacy and invasiveness in your work?
I get permission when I do it. I tell people what they're for. So I don't sneak in and shoot, I mean, they are aware of what I'm doing, and I try to be very honest. I think part of it is capturing that intimate side, and I'm aware of it. A lot of times I send prints to the people that I have photographed their space, and usually people are pretty good about it. I've had only one time where somebody wanted me to not use a picture of the horse after they told me I could. But generally speaking, people are, complimented that I'm recording these things at such a high level and for such a, hopefully, a good purpose.
So then we also were asked, do you think about Isabella when contemplating Isabella's chairs? Is her tangible absence part of your process? Does she actually get to disappear?
No, I mean, I'll always remember her. I'll always remember that space. I'll always remember what I felt when I talked to her. I always will feel the disappointment of that second trip. And then the third trip where the Cuba government had taken over her house and made it look like a Marriott, painted everything, took the chandelier down. So it was I will always owe Isabella for saying, yes, you can photograph it here. So I will always be grateful to her, and I wish I could have done more.
So let's see, I just want to see how many questions we can get to. Do you see the people in your rooms? Is the space what moves you? Can you see people?
It's the people that aren't in the room that I see, and by looking at what the objects and what they mean. The thing I'm looking for now is I want to do, like, for instance, the sacred places in this person's home sometimes is a mantle. I want to start photographing those, where you can really get a sense of who they are, where they are, what they did, who they're with. And I think that's what I'm doing more always when I'm looking at interiors. Interiors are hard to get into. Everybody can look at the cover of a book, but trying to figure out what's behind that facade, what's behind that front door. So I'm always looking, but I've moved on a little bit, in part because I've got a lot of what I wanted, in part because of the difficulty of getting in, and my time is getting shorter to be able to shoot. So I'm, things like the cyanotypes and those things are sort of taking my attention now, which I'm pleased with, because I want to keep working until I can't work.
With regards to the cyanotype, someone wanted to know if you're actually starting with film or analog photographs, or if you're using a digital image.
I'm using a digital image. It's so much quicker, and there's no advantage to me at this point to shoot a 35 millimeter piece of film and scanning it in, as opposed to shooting a digital 35 millimeter, for instance, where I get
people is that you have to create a physical negative to make the print.
Right, and you can do it either through a negative and then using that, or creating a digital file and then printing out a negative to the size that I want to do. So it doesn't matter to me. I used to, until 3-4 years ago, I always shot negative, 4x5, and I would scan it in on my own high-res scanner. So it was always going through digital, because labs haven't been printing with them larger for 20 years. You take a negative into a lab now and say, I want to print. They don't put it any larger and give you a print. They scan it and do it through a digital light jet sort of, or inkjet sort of print, digital print.
Okay, a few more questions?
Yeah, Holden, this one's actually for you. What was the term for suggesting something that is not there, that allows for imagination?
It's actually in literature, in image making. It's an image that's Latin, and it's metonymy. It's metonymy. Onymy. And it's a device where the absence of something can make the thing more powerful. And it works because three or four of the questions has been about the people that inhabit the houses and do you think about them? So people are looking at the spaces, but what they're most intrigued about are the people that were in those spaces that we're not privileged to see. So it's really a device that you use very effectively and successfully.
Great title for an exhibition.
You know, if you want a Latin word.
I'm not gonna, there are a couple technical questions that I don't think we'll get into right now. But Michael, you mentioned that you learn only from your mistakes. Can you give us one or two examples of things you learned from a mistake?
Well, definitely when I moved those golf clubs. That haunts me to this day because it was such a better picture. I think it's more, I can't get specific, but it's more intent of what I was trying to do and it didn't work. But what I looked in the corner of the picture and saw something that I wasn't even focused on or paying any attention to that said, wow. A lot of times learning how to photograph is photographing things and learning from those photographs. I learn way more from looking at my photographs than I do in front of the camera when I'm shooting. So it's just the process of doing it creates situations where you learn. And there's sometimes you think, well, if I do this, I'm going to get that. And not only do you not get it, it's worse than it was. And what you weren't paying attention to might be an opening for you to try something else or learn something else or learn something that you can use later when you're photographing.
And one more question.
Okay. From Ralph Robinson. When you are shooting a location such as Havana, are you thinking about sequencing or creating a body of images, or is it more one shot at a time, making each one as good as you can?
It is that. And I'm also like, I believe in the making stacks of things and then keep editing from those stacks. I'm always trying to make the best image. The approach usually is a similar one in most situations. In other words, I'm looking to shoot something. And so I keep shooting them and I keep building up these stacks of prints and then I start editing from them. So sometimes the portfolio comes out of the stack and sometimes like the cyanotypes, rarely though, but where it comes out of an idea that I just want to really see where it takes me. It's both. But I do I've spent a lot of time looking at old work and learning from it.
Well, I think for photographers that want to improve and get better, you're a great source for them to look at your work and to learn from it because it's so masterful and it's so beautiful. I would encourage anybody that's on the Zoom call that's local to please come and to have the joy of being nose to nose with your pictures because the surfaces are amazing. For those that can't, the work is viewable on the website and it's our present exhibition. Michael, I thank you so much for joining us this morning. I want one little announcement, which is that a week from today on Saturday at 11 o'clock, we will have, I'm not sure whether it's a half an hour or an hour with Sandy Skoglund, where we'll talk about, she conceptually makes images that are basically sculptural. She creates tableaus, she creates whole sets. And from the sets, she makes a picture which is viewable from one place. And it's a whole different idea of rooms because she puts everything in them. Other than Michael, who likes the verisimilitude and finds a room that's soulful and expressive, and in your eyes, it represents the world. She's a constructor and she's a builder. So very different sense of how one wants to create a room. Michael, I thank you so much for sharing with me and sharing with the audience and giving us the privilege of being able to show your pictures and to find new homes for them. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been my honor and pleasure to be with you, and look forward to many more years.
In our Zoom, all the people on Zoom, please have a happy holiday. And thank you for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you we'll speak to you next Saturday, 11 o'clock. Have a good day.